Okay, well, I see that it's 12 noon. Thank you all for joining us for the Woodland Wildlife Wednesday. My name's Agnes Kedmanetz, and I'm with the University of Maryland Extension. I do woodland stewardship education. One of the things I do is coordinating the Maryland-Delaware Master Logger Program, and also I do landowner outreach. The Woodland Wildlife Wednesdays series started maybe about 5 months ago, and we're excited to present all these forestry related topics. And today's topic, we're excited that Dave Eyler, the Deer Project leader for the Maryland State Department of Natural Resources and Wildlife and Heritage Services is going to be joining us. Brian is going to be talking about managing deer in the landscape.
Hey, folks.
So some housekeeping items that I'd like to go over is the webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available on the Extension website. So that address is extension.umd.edu/woodland. There you can also find other information. Also, we appreciate that everybody remains muted and video off. You'll see Brian's face only in the picture that he has as his screen is muted. That works really good to make sure that we all have good connections and that our bandwidth stays functional and good. So some of the benefits of registering for this webinar include attending and learning a lot from Brian. And then the free quarterly newsletter, the branching out newsletter for upcoming events and other forestry related knowledge. There's good articles about forestry and management and other wildlife articles. If you don't want to get that branching out newsletter, please email Pam, and there's her email address at pthomas@umd.edu. And if you want to write in the message subject heading no events, Pam can take you off that branching out newsletter. So also for any questions or comments during the presentation, we encourage them. Please send those in through the chat box at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your cursor over the bottom of the screen, you're going to see some icons come up, and one of them is kind of a talking bubble, and that's how we'll take the questions. So after the presentation, I'll go to the chat box and see what questions have come up, and we'll ask them then. So we thank you for that. And our speaker is Brian Eyler from Maryland. He's the Maryland State Deer Biologist. He's the Deer Project Leader for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. He's been involved in deer management for over 25 years and has been employed by the department since 2002. Brian received his Bachelor of Science in Wildlife and Fisheries Science from Penn State University and his Master's of Science in Ecology from the University of Maryland. Brian resides north of Hagerstown and has been a lifelong resident of the area. We thank you, Brian, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't we get right to it? How about you share your screen? What do you think about that?
That works for me.
Great.
Okay, well, everybody out there in Cyberland, thanks for tuning in. This is my first webinar like this, I think, so bear with me, but hopefully it'll go okay. But so I am Brian Eyler. I'm the Deer Project Leader for Wildlife and Heritage Service with Maryland DNR, and George Temko is our Assistant Deer Project Leader. Some of you out there, I'm sure, have worked with George over the years. He does a lot of our urban suburban deer work. And then relatively new on the block is Lindsay O'Brien, who is on contract with us. She's been with us for several years now, and she does our chronic wasting disease management work. So she's our CWD biologist. So just going to talk a little bit about deer biology, a little bit of management, a little bit of challenges, and then take any questions you have. So jumping right into it, just some general behavior. I know most of you probably know this already, but we'll cover it for those who may not. Some general behavior on deer. Deer do maintain social groups, particularly the females. So there is a social hierarchy. So typically, if you see a group of deer, it'll be dam and her offspring and her offspring's offspring. And they will separate from time to time, but generally they maintain this hierarchy. Deer do have a home range. So they're not out there just wandering aimlessly across the landscape. Females typically have about a 1 square mile home range area, and then males can be quite a bit larger, particularly during the breeding season when it could be 5 miles or greater. Traditionally, we've thought of deer as being nocturnal, but more and more you see them at all times during the day, and night is both. But typically, they're still considered a nocturnal animal, and deer bed down. They are ruminants, so they have that compound stomach. Then they need to allow that rumination process to work. So they will bed for a period. They'll get up and browse and feed, and then they'll bed again and let that rumination process work. And they do that, through a 24-hour cycle. So it's not up all night and bed all day. They're up and down periodically through that cycle. So they are ruminants, which means they can make use of a wide variety of foods. They're not grazers, so they're typically not eating grass. They're what we call browsers. So woody stems, fruits, nuts, mast. And unfortunately, they love landscaping and they love farmers' crops, which makes it challenging to manage them sometimes. But they can eat a lot of different things, and that gives them a competitive advantage in some ways. A little bit on breeding biology. So a lot of you, if you have property you're managing, obviously have seen these signs as well. They use this for communicating. These scrapes and rubs are what I'm talking about. They use these for communication during the breeding cycle. So they'll urinate in them or deposit scent off their antlers. They'll do rubs like this on the right. To rub the velvet off their antlers, and then also to deposit scent to communicate and to help time the breeding and of what receptive females may be in the area. Peak breeding in Maryland is in the first 2 weeks of November. Over 90% of female deer are bred during those 2 weeks. So they only breed one time a year. And then gestation is about 220 days. So most of our fawns are born in late May or early June. It's roughly a 2 fawn average per doe. So fawns are born in early June. Rarely, but some of them will actually breed that November. It's just a small percentage, but some will if they're born early enough. But most of the fawns will breed the next year when we call them a yearling. That first breeding, when they're a yearling, they typically have 1 fawn. And then after that, as long as habitat's healthy and the deer is healthy, they'll, twins aren't uncommon, and triplets are even not really terribly unusual anymore. But sex ratio is typically about 1-to-1 for the fawns. Antlers, it's all about the antlers. So some interesting physiology. Antlers are bone. I think they're the fastest growing bone in the mammal world. Antlers begin growing in March. They stop growing in September. And they shed them in January and February. Most bucks do that, and then they start growing a new set. If the deer is healthy, and again, the habitat is healthy, typically each set of antlers will be larger than the previous set up until the deer is probably 6, 7, 8 years old. That's typically sexual maturity or peak maturity, after which they will start to decline. They use antlers for fighting during breeding to compete for females, and then they also use them or can use them for defense. The antler size is dependent on age, nutrition, and genetics. The older the deer gets, up till 6, 7, or 8, like I said, the bigger the antlers. Better nutrition, better habitat, bigger antlers, and genetics play a role in it as well. But age and nutrition are probably the most important when it comes to antlers. We'll shift gears and talk a little bit about management history. So if you go back to pre-colonial and colonial times, deer were abundant in the East, including Maryland. They were important to the Native American tribes in the region, and they were recognized for their importance as early as the 1700s when there was legislation and regulations on the books regarding their harvest. Move into the 1800s, like a lot of other wildlife and habitat, deer took a beating. They were nearly extirpated from Maryland and most of the East Coast. We had the Industrial Revolution, market hunting. Those regulations fell by the wayside. Habitat was altered and destroyed to fuel that Industrial Revolution. And deer in Maryland were relegated largely to Garrett and Allegheny County, our far two western counties. And that was about it. Again, not just a Maryland phenomenon. I mean, this was happening up and down the East Coast and West as well. So in the early 1900s, people started to become more aware of the environment and the need to protect the environment. And deer kind of fell under that umbrella. So you can think of the 1900s to the 1960s as a period of protection and restocking. Deer were brought into Maryland to restock from as far as the Midwest. So deer came in from a lot of different areas. Again, that's happened up and down the East Coast. There was either no hunting of deer or antlered only hunting in the early 1900s. The female she's given birth to the offspring. She's key to population growth. If you remove a buck, there's always another buck there that can do the breeding. So you protect the female, harvest the buck. If you want to continue the growth of that deer population. So that sentiment has kind of carried through. We have very progressive hunters in Maryland, so it's not as pronounced, but the lure of the buck is still out there, and and there's a significant number of hunters that favor hunting bucks and not hunting does, and that kind of all got its start during this time. We had our first hunting license requirement in 1918, and again, we restocked deer from many, many different areas. So the 20s to the 70s, it kind of overlaps, but that was a period of regrowth of the deer population in Maryland. We actually had deer refuges where deer were propagated and released as well. Grinbrook WMA down in Owens Mills is an example of one of our refuge propagation areas. And then also during this time, we saw a lot of improvement in the habitat. So a lot of those areas that might have been destroyed earlier were starting to come back. And deer are an early successional species. They really favor early successional habitat, and this was just a great time from that standpoint for deer. And then also we had a lot of urban and suburban development starting to occur, and that also improves deer habitat. And I'll touch on that in the next slide. So the 1980s were when deer started to become more of an issue from a management standpoint, and a lot of it was because of the transition of Maryland's landscape into the suburban urban area that it is now. Hopefully you can see my pointer, but this is a prime example. You take this area that's ag rich, and you have your cover, but then you bring in a suburb like this. This is just taking great deer habitat and making it even better, because not only do you have great food resources, but when you bring in developments like this, a lot of times you take hunting out of the equation. And when you take deer hunting out of the equation, that allows deer populations to increase even faster. So that was happening a lot during the 80s and the 90s, and continues to today. But that's one of the main issues why we have problems managing deer in Maryland in some areas. So we also had modern farming practices, pumping out more bushels per acre than ever before, and unfortunately a lot of that is deer food, and just a good time to be a deer, but it started to be a headache from a management standpoint. So you put it all together, you have favorable habitat, few natural predators. Man really is the only effective predator in Maryland to control deer. We have bears, we have coyotes, bobcats will rarely take fawns as well, but man is really the only predator left that can drive deer populations. We also have mild climate. We don't have winter kill in Maryland. If you go north into New England and the Canadian provinces, their deer populations are controlled by winter. If they have a severe winter, it can knock their deer population back for 5 or more years. We don't have that here. If we have a real hard winter, we may lose a few fawns in Garrett County and maybe Allegheny, but by and large, we have a mild climate. So you put all three of those together, and it's just a recipe for a very healthy deer population. We do model that population. We use a sex age kill or a counting model. We peaked back in about 2 decades ago now. Time goes fast, but we were around 300,000 deer back around 2000. We got very liberal and aggressive with our hunting seasons and bag limits. We dropped that population down significantly. We still have a lot of deer, and then we've been trending between 200 and 250,000 since then. So we'll keep after them. And try, our goal in a lot of the areas, particularly in the middle part of the state, was we need to bring these numbers down more. We just got to figure out how to do it. It's a challenge. So we have a lot of deer, but we also have a lot of good deer in Maryland from a hunting perspective. And even in little old Maryland, deer hunting is very popular. Our coastal plain soils, those soils around the bay, are some of the best soils in the country for growing big deer. And we have some really nice deer. We had a buck harvested probably 10 years ago now or more in southern Maryland that was top 25 in the world. That's how, so we can grow some very, very nice large antler deer and large bodied deer, and deer hunting is popular. And that's a good thing because there's a lot of dollars behind that. The last survey data I saw showed that about $260 million were spent annually on all hunting in Maryland, not just deer, but most of the majority of hunters are hunting deer along with other species. But so hunting generated about $266 million in the state. And then if you follow that through with the ripple effect, it's about a $400 million economy. So it's a significant amount of money. And it's important to the Wildlife and Heritage Service, who we work for, because we are almost solely special funded. We get very few general tax dollars. Most of our money comes from hunting license sales. And again, most of those hunters are buying a hunting license to hunt deer. And then on top of the hunting license sales, there is the federal aid money, Pittman-Robertson excise tax money that goes matching that hunting license sales. So when you add those two together, I think it's probably over 95% of our budget now comes from the sale of hunting license to hunters who by and large are hunting deer. And then that money doesn't just go back to managing deer. Obviously, we manage all non-game, all game. We do a lot of good things with that money. So from that standpoint, deer are a real benefit to us and most other states. Deer are the cash cow for most states in the East, particularly. But we all know the negatives as well, and there's a lot of dollars behind this as well. Deer vehicle collisions, crop damage, urban suburban deer issues, overpopulation issues, and then just forest damage. From browse damage from too many deer. A lot of money involved here as well, and a significant problem for many of the residents in the state. We are revising our 10-year deer management plan right now, and as part of that, we collected public comments, and we also did a public opinion survey. And that the link to that public opinion survey was in the announcement that was sent out for this webinar. From Andrew Kling. The link to that public opinion survey is there. And so it's online, and there's a lot of good information in there. I would encourage you to check it out. But in any case, from the public opinion, from the public input process, of all the comments we received, nearly a quarter of them were related to urban and suburban deer issues, and 16% were related to crop damage issues. So these are two major issues with having too many deer. the survey data aren't real recent. I think these numbers are from 2011, but millions of dollars in damage a year attributed to deer crop damage. I'm sure it's much higher than this now. This was, like I said, nearly a decade ago. The public opinion survey just confirms that. If you look, it's about 3/4 of those surveyed said they have deer damage, deer crop damage. And unfortunately, that's up. We asked the same question back in 2007, and you can see it has increased significantly over that time. Deer vehicle collisions. State Farm does a real good projection for all of the states for the entire insurance industry on animal strikes, and they estimate about 30,000 deer vehicle collisions annually in Maryland. And if you figure $3,000, $4,000 per hit, it's easily over $100 million in damage annually due to deer vehicle collisions. And we're pretty far down the list. There's a lot of states out there that have a lot more deer vehicle collisions, per mile driven than we do in Maryland, fortunately, but it's still a lot of money involved here. Back to the public opinion survey, when it was asked of those who said they'd like to see the deer population decrease, the number one reason why was to reduce deer vehicle collisions. So those are definitely concerns with our residents, and we continue to struggle with how to fix it. Fortunately, though, it's not all bad. If from that public opinion survey, it's split about 40-40 on I enjoy seeing deer around and having deer around compared to I enjoy seeing a few deer but worry about the problems they cause. So that's about split. And then but it's a relatively small number that think deer are just a pain and they just wish they weren't even on the landscape. So we're fortunate from that standpoint. That's why what makes it so challenging, though, to manage deer is because there's so many different people that have a vested interest in them and how they may impact them. 70 years ago, the managing deer was a lot easier because we're just trying to restore a species to the landscape, a native species that should be here, and it would provide a recreational opportunity. But we've went way beyond that. Had no idea at that time we'd be creating the monster we are or did. But in any case, now, whether it's a suburban mom concerned about Lyme disease or crop damage or forest damage, or another wildlife biologist concerned about understory damage for warblers or animal welfare concerns, there's a lot of different people out there that have a vested interest in deer, and it makes the job challenging on how to satisfy everyone. We're fortunate, though, going back kind of related to that other graph I showed, but we are fortunate. So, like I said, most people don't view deer as a complete nuisance. 80%. But if you look back at this survey data, nearly 90% of the general population surveyed moderately or strongly agreed that deer were an important part of the balance of nature. And it was only 6% that felt otherwise. So that's a good thing. We do have a deer management plan, as I mentioned. So the first plan was in 1998. It was revised in 2009, and we are putting the wraps on it now for the next iteration. It kind of it lays out how we approach deer management in the state. So cultural carrying capacity is the level of deer that humans can tolerate or residents can live with versus biological carrying capacity, which is the level that deer can live at based on habitat availability. So we manage for a balance between this. Cultural carrying capacity most often is much lower than biological carrying capacity. And again, that presents a challenge. Our deer plan also outlines our primary management options. Our most effective options are lethal based, and hunter harvest is our number one management tool. And then we also use crop damage and some of these other things. I'll talk about these real briefly. But hunter harvest is our number one tool, most effective tool for managing deer, and it's like this in most states. This is our harvest numbers from back when we first started hunting again in 1927. We harvested 5 antlered deer that year. You can see where we've come since then. The maroon is the antlered harvest or buck harvest, and the yellow is the antlerless harvest, which is mostly females and the young of the year males. We call those antlerless deer. Excuse me. You can see how this population, if you look at the buck harvest, this indicates exponential growth in the population back here during the 80s and 90s. And as you know, and then in response, we ramped up the antlerless harvest in relation to the antlered harvest to help bring this population back down. We have stabilized it, brought it down, but again, in a lot of areas, we could bring it down more. But hunting is our most effective tool. You know, these yellow bars comprise 40,000 female deer, 50,000 female deer. We have no other tool that could remove, you know, those deer off the landscape. And, but, you know, by removing those deer off the landscape, they're not around next spring to have 25,000 fawns or 30,000 fawns, and then so on down the line. So, you know, so definitely our most effective tool, and hunters pay to do this. You know, they buy a license, and again, we use those license dollars to manage all, you know, all game, non-game, et cetera, in the state. So this is a very, very effective model employed by most states for deer management, and it will be our go-to tool for the foreseeable future. And, you know, and we're fortunate that there is strong support for hunting. It's a very small percentage of the population that hunts. Less than 5% of the population hunts deer. But that doesn't mean the other, you know, 95% are anti-hunting. It's contrary to that. That public opinion survey where we surveyed the general Maryland population found, you know, over 75% moderately or strongly agreed that deer should be hunted to maintain a healthy population. My screen keeps coming down on top of my graphics. So, and then if you look at what is the general opinion of deer hunting, you know, again, over 65% are somewhat or strongly in favor of deer hunting. So that's good. You know, we have support for our most effective tool for deer management. We're very liberal. You know, if you're wondering what the graphic down in the corner is, we're throwing the kitchen sink at them, and we have been for quite a while. So we have deer seasons that run from early September to early February now. We have a 45 plus deer bag limit in Region B, which is basically from Hancock in Washington County east to the ocean. And then Region A is Garrett and Allegheny County and a small part of Washington County. But we have a 5 bag limit out there. We're much more effective at managing deer in Region A. So we have to be a little bit more conservative out there. But 5 is still fairly liberal, given the habitat. So we're very aggressive on seasons and bag limits. We have an unlimited antlerless archery bag limit in our suburban deer management zone. We had this for a while, and now we brought it back. So this will be in effect coming starting next month in September. Baltimore, Howard, Montgomery, Anne Arundel, and Prince George's counties comprise the suburban deer management zone. And again, archers will be able to take as many antlerless deer as they want this season. So all of our regulations kind of focus on encouraging the harvest of antlerless deer, again, which is mostly females, in an effort to control deer numbers. We're also very liberal on the allowance of weaponry. We allow modern muzzle loaders. We allow crossbows. New this year in our shotgun counties, you'll be able to use straight-walled cartridge rifles, which are very similar to a shotgun in ballistics. So anything to keep the interest of our hunters, to try to keep them out in the woods harvesting female deer for us is our goal. You've also seen expanded Sunday hunting over the last decade and a half. We have 3 counties, Baltimore, Howard, and Prince George's, that still don't have any Sunday hunting, but the rest of the counties have some amount of Sundays. DNR doesn't control or regulate Sunday hunting. It is in state law. So it takes the work of the county administration, county delegation to change that law to allow Sundays in their counties. So it is a mix depending on what county you're in. And then what we've also seen in recent years is reduced archery hunting safety zones. The standard has been 150 yards for many, many, many years for safety zones. And in recent years, recognizing that archery is a very up close sport or type of deer hunting, those safety zones have been reduced in some counties to 50 and 100 yards to open up more areas to try to maximize or increase the number of deer harvested. So we're throwing a kitchen sink at them, and we've had good success, but we still have areas where we need to do better. Going back to our management options, so that was hunter harvest. Deer management permits are also effective. So what a deer management permit is if a farmer is experiencing deer damage to their crops, they can apply. They get a crop damage permit or deer management permit. It is viable or it's good for 365 days a year, and they can harvest deer that are causing damage to their crops. This system actually peaked back in the early 2000s at over 13,000. Remember, I said we got liberal, though, with our regular seasons and bag limits at this time. So some of those crop damage deer shifted to the regular hunter harvest. So we saw a decline in the number of crop damage permits being used, but that has slowly crept back up, and we're up around 10,000 deer a year now again that are being harvested under our crop damage permits. Other lethal control methods in Maryland are managed hunts and sharpshooting. Not nearly as many deer harvested these ways, but managed hunts are popular in our urban counties: Montgomery County, Howard County, Anne Arundel County, to a lesser degree PG County, but they have identified some of their public areas where they can, do these tightly regulated managed hunts to remove deer. They have been very effective. These counties have great staff on board running these programs, and they put a lot of work into it and have made strides in helping reduce deer numbers in these areas. So very effective. And then in areas where hunting just isn't feasible, there is a limited amount of sharpshooting, professional removal that is conducted mostly at night, but generally less than 2,000 deer a year are taken by that method. So, but throw it all, put it all together, and it is a very effective deer management package for the state. Non-lethal options, fencing is very effective. You could definitely, if you put the right fence up, you can keep deer away. It's expensive, though. It requires maintenance, and it doesn't solve the deer problem. It just moves the deer problem somewhere else, either to other parts of your own property or to other properties. But it can be very effective, and we do recommend it in some cases. Nurseries, different tree plantings, or small scale backyards, those kind of areas, fencing can be very, very effective. Deer resistant plantings and repellents, I'll throw a plug out for our extension folks because they've done quite a bit of work on this in the past. There are deer resistant plants out there, but deer are very adaptable. And a plant that they won't eat this year, if they get desperate enough, they will eat it next year. So you have to keep working at this as well. But there are deer resistant plants out there that you can use. And then repellents, some of these are gimmicks. Some of them can work. Dogs can be very effective. And we actually have, I think, at least one nursery in Maryland that does employ dogs to try to keep deer away. But then you have dogs that you have to maintain. So it's not completely labor free. And then again, some of these other ones I think are more gimmick than actually working. But there's plenty of them out there on the market if you want to dabble. So contraceptives and sterilization, I'll just spend one slide on that. It's really largely still in the research phase. The best chance of success for contraceptives and sterilization is going to be in fenced areas or some kind of isolated insular deer population where they're easily accessible and somewhat acclimated to people, because you're going to have to capture the deer to use the contraceptives or sterilization. And that makes it challenging. There's 2 drugs currently approved for use on deer, Gonacon and Zonistat D. Both of these are approved by EPA as registered pesticides for deer use. Gonacon has been regulated in Maryland for over a decade. So it could be used in Maryland. It has never been used. There's never been an application to use it in Maryland. Zonistat D is not approved to be used in Maryland and is relatively new on the block. It's a derivative of Zonistat H, which was for horses. So there's different label requirements for these drugs that make them challenging to use. Gonacon requires capture and tagging of each deer. And we would require that same requirement for we would have that same requirement for Zonistat D if we would permit Zonistat D. So that makes it challenging because you got to get your hands on every deer. You got to immobilize it, ear tag it, and treat it with the contraceptive. Zonistat D has the other nuance that the label precludes it from being used on food or feed. And deer are food. There's always a possibility of a deer entering the food chain, either from a hunter or somebody picking up a roadkill. So that makes it very difficult for Zonistat D to be used. Talking Maryland here. So those two, they have some baggage that go along with them, and the requirement of having to catch the deer, and then also you have to follow up with a booster shot. It makes it very, very challenging to try to talk about managing deer over a broad expanse or on the landscape. You have expense, the need to capture, and the need for a follow-up booster. And we're very progressive in Maryland. We've actually cooperated on 3 or 4 studies, maybe even more than that if I counted them up now, looking at contraceptives. Some of the pivotal trials for Gonacon were done in Maryland. So we have, firsthand experience with these and access to the results. And it's just, they work to reduce fawning. There's no question about that. If you catch a doe, you treat her, you give her a booster, you can stop reproduction. No question about that. But it hasn't been adequately demonstrated that you can reduce deer numbers, at least based on Maryland studies. One of the studies has been ongoing for over 20 years, and the area still has over 100 deer per square mile on that area. And in recent years, they've modified the study. But in any case, it's just when you talk landscape level use, it's just not ready for prime time based on what we've seen. They continue to work on this, and that's great. We need something, but it's not there now. So in recent years, so that's contraceptives. In recent years, there's been some work with sterilization. The thought being, if you're going to catch the deer and tag the deer while you have the deer down, why not permanently sterilize it? Then there's no need for a booster. So there's been some research, quite a bit of research actually done with sterilization. And again, it is effective, but it requires the capture of the deer and then veterinarian procedures, so again, kind of limited on scale as to where this will work. So we will continue to cooperate and work on these studies. But at this point, from a management perspective, we don't think it's ready for use. So challenges, I keep saying challenges, and there's quite a few of them. Talk a little bit about that. One of the biggest challenges is decline in hunters and bag limit saturation of the hunters that we do have left. So our hunters, myself included, are getting older, and we're not replacing ourselves with these folks. We've seen a decline in hunter numbers. Again, not just Maryland. I mean, this is I don't want to say across the country because it's not quite as bad in the Midwest, but we are, there are a lot of states out there struggling with this issue. This is Maryland hunting license sales trend from 1940 or so, and you can see this decline in the sale of hunting licenses. The charcoal is the regular resident license. We have a fairly strong non-resident license sales, which helps us. But if you look at the juniors, this segment here, you can see what percentage or how many they numbered back in the 60s compared to what they number in recent years. And our senior population continues to get a little bigger each year. So we're not replacing ourselves. And that's a challenge because, as I mentioned, hunting is our number one tool for managing deer. So we have a great outreach department or staff, and they're working hard on this, as is every state. But we got to figure out some way to fix this trend. That's a big challenge. Probably another another big challenge is access to land to hunt or control deer. It goes hand in hand because it's hard to recruit hunters if they don't have any place to go hunt. And there's a lot of land in Maryland that's either not hunted, or it's not hunted enough, or not hunted effectively. And these areas all serve as refuges for deer. And then that just supplies the landscape with more and more deer. So those two are the biggest challenges that we face in Maryland. Effective urban and suburban deer management is a huge challenge as well. I mentioned George Timko at the beginning. George is our urban suburban deer manager, and he struggles with this, every day, working with communities on how to try to solve some of their deer problems and find consensus among the community. It's very, very challenging. We'll keep working at it. If you look at, this is the 270 corridor from Frederick down to DC. You think about that as being a relatively populated area, but just look at the amount of green on this, on this slide, and that's all prime deer habitat. So, how do you manage deer in Gaithersburg or Rockville? It's very challenging, and we need some solutions. Non-lethal technologies. We just had a slide on contraceptives and sterilization. So we really need more work here. And they do continue to work at this, but we really could use some kind of alternative tool in some of these areas to manage deer for sure. One of the problems I think here that slows it down is the fact that there's really not any money to be made in this program, so you're not seeing a lot of investment from the private sector. Gonacon was developed by USDA, so it was on the government's dime. But if there's not a profit to be made, or money to be made, it might be hard to get private research or creation of a drug like this that can be used. But we need something, and the key players in this are working on it, and hopefully we can move forward over the coming decade. It's a major challenge getting consensus on deer population levels and management strategies. What the density farmers want is very different than the density that hunters want, which is very different than the density that Rockville residents want. So it can be, it's very challenging to try to get agreement. And then also on the management strategies, do we hunt? Do we contracept? Do we fence? It's very challenging. It's hard to find harmony. Politics are always involved, and it's no different with deer management. And I won't go any further than that with that, but politics enter into this as well. We have a lot of different governmental agencies and a lot of jurisdictions, and politics play into it as well. Crop damage issues we already talked about. That's a major challenge to try to fix this for our farmers, but we'll keep working on it as well. So wrapping up, the last challenge, I'm almost done here, is chronic wasting disease, CWD. I thought I would throw some slides in on this because it is a challenge for us. It takes some of our dollars and some of our time that we could be using for other things. But we do have CWD in Maryland, unfortunately, and we have to monitor for it, and just mainly to keep our public educated. But CWD is related to mad cow disease, or bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE. You may remember that. But CWD was first diagnosed in Colorado in 1967. It's mainly in white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, and moose. There's probably some other species now. This slide's a little dated, but it's not a bacteria. It's not a virus. It's just an abnormal mutated prion. And when it comes into contact with your prions or your proteins, it causes them to misfold. This is very general description. Literally causes holes in the brain and eventual death. And again, it's a concern because it is in the same family as mad cow disease and Creutzfeldt-Jakob. There's no evidence that humans can contract CWD from eating venison. It's been around since '67. There's no proven cases, but because it is in the same family, we do need to monitor for it and keep up on developments. As far as transmission goes, it's definitely animal to animal, so deer to deer. Can also be picked up from contaminated feed, contaminated soil, and there's probably other transmission modes that we're not aware of at this time. Very difficult to control in the wild. If it's in a wild population, they have tried herd reductions where you decrease deer density significantly so it doesn't spread as fast among individuals. That has shown to work in some areas, but I think it's strongly related to habitat conditions and geography of the landscape, where it may work and where it may not work. But generally, probably more failures than successes at herd reduction to try to control it in the wild. It is also in captive deer, obviously. Maryland is fortunate. We're not a big captive deer state. We just have a handful of individuals that have backyard pets. We're not a deer farming state. But in those states, like Pennsylvania, for instance, that is a big deer farming state. CWD is a major concern and requires significant management. But in those areas, in those deer farms, they generally will depopulate the farm to eliminate the disease or the spread of the disease. So not easy. Started in 1967, just a little figure here, out here in Colorado, and it has slowly jumped around since then. Definitely some of these areas were the result of buying and selling deer. So without knowing it, transporting contaminated deer or infected deer. Not all of them, but and definitely in some cases. But it is slowly expanding and will continue to expand. Here in the East, it's West Virginia, Maryland, and Virginia. Just looking a little closer at it, Garrett County, Allegheny County, and Washington County. So West Virginia found it first in Slanesville back in 2005. We had a buck killed in 2010. That was our first positive, and then it has slowly, expanded since then. So from a management perspective, we have a disease management area. So it's Allegheny County and Washington County. We limit carcass transport in an effort to slow the spread of this disease. We also sample from within these two counties, and also Garrett and Frederick County. We take anywhere from 300 to 700 samples every year to random hunter harvested deer just to monitor for this disease, and we will continue to do so. Not trying to eradicate the disease, but just trying to monitor where it is so we can keep hunters and our public educated. So just to sum up and wrap up this presentation, the concerns with CWD are multifold. So there's deer population concerns. If you go out west where it's been since the 60s, it definitely has negatively impacted some deer populations in the west. It has caused population declines. It's unclear what impacts will be in the east. We have more productive habitat for deer. We have more productive deer as a result, and it's unclear what population consequences we will see here in the east. We'll have to watch that play out and to see. Human health concerns, as I mentioned, it is in the same family as mad cow or BSE. And there have been conflicting study results regarding human susceptibility. There's been some studies with primates that would suggest that we could contract CWD, but then there's studies that say, no, we can't contract CWD. So again, we'll have to see how this all plays out. There has never been a case, though, a proven case since 1967 of a human contracting CWD. There's also test issues in that it's not a food safety test. So the random samples that we send in every year, the results come back either detected or not detected. It doesn't mean if it comes back not detected, it doesn't mean that the deer did not have the prion. It just meant it wasn't at a level that was detected. So you can't really look at this as a food safety test. And it's also, there's a limited number of facilities that can test these deer. So it can take, several months for us to get test results back. So it's a challenge from that standpoint. And then agency concerns, from our standpoint, we have to look at funding and the loss of an effective tool. So, if hunters are concerned about CWD and they stop hunting, or they decide to go to another state to hunt, we lose those hunting license sales. That's our funding source, and it impacts not just deer management, but all wildlife management in the state. It also potentially means a loss of an effective tool. If there's deer hunters decide to stop hunting in an area where we have CWD, deer numbers are going to increase. Higher density means the disease will actually spread faster. So it's actually, it's actually worse in that case. So we're concerned from that standpoint for, for CWD as well. So, and I think that's all I have. It is. So Agnes.
Great. That was great. Thank you, Brian.
Sure.
So much information there. Wow.
Yes, there was a lot of information there. Sorry.
That was great. That brought on a lot of questions. So why don't we start with theirs? It's 12:51 right now. If we go a little over 1 o'clock, we're going to continue to answer these questions. If you do have questions, you can contact Brian. Brian, can you let them know your email address?
Sure. I should have put that on here. I forgot, didn't I? So it's just Brian, BRIAN .Eyler, EYLER at maryland.gov.
Thank you.
Should be able to find it through dnr.maryland.gov, our website as well. Sorry about that. I forgot to put that on there.
Okay. So if we don't get to your question, you can definitely contact Brian. He's great to talk to. Let's start with, you had started the talk off with telling us a little bit about deer and their natural history. And you mentioned something about being nocturnal. So are deer considered nocturnal, or are they crepuscular? I don't know if I said that word right.
Crepuscular.
Right.
Well, like I said, way back in my college days, we learned they were nocturnal. But you could argue crepuscular as well. So, yeah.
Do deer eat Japanese honeysuckle? Are they going to be eating some invasive plants?
So yes, they do eat Japanese honeysuckle. But a lot of the invasive plants they do not eat, unfortunately, which just exacerbates that issue as well. And they've also been implicated in the spread of some of those invasive plants via the wavy leaf basket grass. Seeds from wavy leaf basket grass probably being spread by deer. But they do eat Japanese honeysuckle for sure.
Yeah. You mentioned in your talk that they're adaptable. 1 year you may be safe with that plant, and then the next year you might not be. So interesting how they can adapt to their surroundings and their situations.
Right.
If deer are browsers, what would they be eating in an unkept pasture?
There's not your unkept pasture will have forbs and other plants, non-grasses that are growing in there. Clover, for instance, they love clover. Those kind of species, broadleaves, that's probably what they're mainly eating if you see them in a pasture like that.
Great. So there's lots of talk and questions about native and non-native. Like, if they prefer native plants, why do they come to my yard and eat my plants, native and other? And I borderland, which has hundreds of. So interesting question. So there's a forest land for them to forage in and be in, but yet they come to this person's yard and eat their plants.
Yeah, well, it's very tasty, very concentrated, very easy to get to. And they're protected on top of it. Azaleas, hostas, look out. Well, they arborvitae, they're definitely prime candidates to be browsed.
Right. So this may be a familiar scene to many people out there. I often see 40 to 50 deer in my fields. What could be done? And if money is created by deer via hunting, how much is lost through deer eating hardwood seedlings, therefore altering the potential tree harvest and changing the woodland makeup? So it sounds like two different questions there.
Yeah.
What can be done when,
So again, hunting is our most effective tool. So if there's any way at all that you can sustain hunting on your property, that's going to be your best approach to try to manage deer, whether it's your family or friends or a group, and that's not always possible. Unfortunately, I realize that, but if there's any way to get hunting onto the property, that's currently the most effective tool to try to, combat some of these large deer numbers. As far as the hardwood damage through regeneration and all, very hard to put a dollar value on it, but no question it's significant. No question it's significant browse damage to regeneration. So I will say that it's not, deer often are the scapegoat for regeneration issues, and that's not always the case. It can have a lot to do with environmental conditions and soil conditions. But no doubt deer are responsible for a lot of damage to hardwood forests and to woodlots, no question.
You showed us some slides of the Maryland resident landowner and hunters' attitudes towards deer hunting and deer management survey. And Andrew put a link to that in the chat box. Andrew is also part of the University of Maryland Extension Forestry team. And he put that link in the chat box. If anybody's interested in seeing that, it is there in the chat box. The Audubon was really interested in this discussion and how deer browse new growth of bush honeysuckle. So it's like the deer are creating regeneration of maybe some species of plants that we don't want.
They definitely do. No question about that. Whether it's through, like I said, whether it's through browsing and then just, response to the plant, or whether it's through seed dispersal via feces or seed dispersal via just, transport on their coat or legs. But yeah, no doubt they do increase, if you want to call it propagation of non-natives and invasives. That's for sure. So, yeah.
Yeah. So somebody was mentioning here that they have a property about 13, it looks like it might say about 13 acres there, and they did a planting of some trees there, and they have tree shelters on there. And, the cost for those tree shelters are about $5. There's no understory on the property yet. This person's question is about no funding for deer fencing. Is there any funding in Maryland for deer fencing that you're aware of?
Not that I am aware of. There may be grants from time to time, but not a consistent source that I am aware of that I could refer. I would say I would refer them to the extension service maybe to see if they're aware of anything. So, yeah.
Our extension service, Jonathan Kays, has been an extension agent in Maryland here for 30 years. And that's really one of his priorities, is talking and sharing information about deer and how to manage for that. So Jonathan Kays, he's a great person to get in touch with too. So another question here, what percentage of deer need to be culled every year to keep the population stable? What estimate do you have on that?
So it varies, again, based on habitat, et cetera. But, as a rule of thumb, 30 to 40% to keep it stable. Like I said, it can vary, and that's a very rough number, but you could just figure 30 to 40%.
Great. So I see we're at the top of the hour. It's 1 o'clock, but we still have more questions. Brian, I'm still good for going ahead with the rest of the questions. How about you?
Yep, sure.
Good. And we appreciate people staying on, but we understand that it is the top of the hour, but we'd like to move forward with some of these questions. If you haven't heard your question yet, hopefully it'll come up.
Thank you. Thank you all for the ones that are leaving.
Yes, and good reminder. So our next Woodland Wildlife Wednesday is going to be September 30th. We're going to have Bob Long from the Department of Natural Resources, and he's going to talk about bobwhite quail. Interesting bird that, doesn't get a lot of traction. So it's going to be great. Okay, so this next question, why can't we have hunting season in the summer when our lilies and hostas are being destroyed?
So So there's multi answers to that. But the biggest one is looking at the life cycle of the deer and the fact that they do give birth to fawns in May and June. And so hunting seasons during the summer increase the likelihood of orphaning fawns. So there's a humane aspect to it, or ethical aspect, I guess, maybe, if you want to term it that. So it's partly that. It's also partly that, hunters don't like to waste their game. And so hunting during the summer is not very attractive due to meat spoilage. So there's a host of reasons, but those are probably the two biggest ones. And also, there's a lot of other outdoor activities during the summer, versus the winter, fall and winter. So just as from a compatibility standpoint, is just, fall and winter are the better times of year for those reasons to have hunting season.
Great. There's a question here. You mentioned something about the deer management zones, and there's a question here. How can Harford County be added to the suburban deer management zone?
So we do regulations every 2 years in Maryland. So every 2 years we go through the whole public opinion or public input process. So I would say not this coming spring, but the following spring, participate in that process and submit that, and try to garner some support for it, and present it that way, and see if it gets any traction. And we consider anything, any proposals. Like I said, we really value public input, and that would be the right way to approach that, to try to add Harford to the suburban zone. I will say, I will put out there though that the antlerless bag limit for archery is outside of the zone in Region B is 15 antlerless. I think we had one hunter harvest more than 15. So from that standpoint, and then that doesn't include the firearms bag limit and the muzzleloader bag limit on top of that. So the existing bag limit in Harford County probably is adequate for 99.99% of the hunters that hunt in Harford County. I'll just throw that out there. But like I said, we'll do our public input process again, not this coming spring, but the following spring, and that would be the way to introduce any ideas for new regs. So
okay. So spring 2022.
Correct.
And
yes.
they can find that. They can find that on your website, or
yes, and we always put a press release out announcing it. We'll do 2 or 3 public meetings. We'll have the online comments forum where people can put comments. So yeah, we generally try to make it as well known as we can. That typically starts in February.
Great. A question here: have you seen conflicts between deer hunting and other recreational uses, such as long hunt uses with such a long hunting season and expanding hunting into Sundays?
We really have not. And we have some really good data on that in that public opinion survey, because we focused some of the survey on those exact types of questions. So I would reference this person to follow that link and download the survey report. And there is very few, the percentage is fairly small of people who have reported non-hunters reporting conflicts with hunters, for outdoor activities, whether it's Sunday or just hunting in general. The data from that survey would suggest there are not a lot of conflicts happening out there between different user groups.
That's good to hear.
Yep.
You mentioned those managed hunts. Was that a municipally managed hunt, or how did?
So it varies. Probably the majority, I would say, are county run. One of those persons was on here actually, but most so it's a combination. There's county, actually some of the state parks have managed hunts. And if I thought hard enough, there's probably some at the sub-county level, but I can't think offhand. I can give you an example. Rockville is thinking about having a managed archery hunt. So that would be an example probably at a municipal level. But most of them would be county and state run at this time.
So if somebody was interested in organizing a managed hunt in their area or whatever level they want to have it on, county or whatever, would they contact you for that?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah, they could contact us as a start, and then we can either work with them or point them in the right direction for sure.
Can you give us your email just one more time then again?
Yeah, so it's Brian, BRIAN .Eyler, EYLER at maryland.gov.
Great. We still have a few more questions here just to move us forward. So somebody here, last year I allowed bow hunters to have access to my property for the first time. So this was their first time and they're wanting to do it again this year. If this person's goal is population control and reduction, what is a reasonable number of does could this person ask to be taken off during the course of the season?
That would depend on the size of the property. We would need to know the size of the property. If they would like to get up with me, I'd be happy to chat with them and get more specifics.
Approximately 27 acres.
Approximately 30 acres. Do you know where they're located?
Let's see if they said, if this person is still on the line, if they can unmute. They did not say what county, no.
Okay. I'm just looking here. I need to talk to them. It's really hard for me I really can't give a blanket prescription. So if they're on the line or not, if they could reach out to me, I'd be happy to chat with them. I'd like to know where it's at in the surrounding, whether it's urban, suburban, country, that would play into it as well.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yep.
The next question, I tend to pass up does that have fawns or yearlings with them. I've recently read that it's not necessary since almost all young deer will survive. Any thoughts on this?
That is correct. And again, that goes back to why not have summer hunting. We purposely try to keep hunting season, the start of it in September, because by that time fawns generally are weaned and can survive on their own. So typically if you're out there, unless it's extremely early archery season, for them, and even then it would be rare. But yeah, deer at that point, fawns can live on their own perfectly fine at that point. Right. So, yep. That being said, that's it. So.
Okay. I've thought of this thought before too. Somebody asked, what about creating a market for deer meat and then maybe somewhat managing them like cattle?
So I didn't quite catch it, Agnes. Was it creating a market? Is that what you said?
Yes, creating a market for deer meat.
So selling wildlife really goes against one of the fundamental principles of North American, game management or wildlife management. You put a value on something, you can quickly, over harvest or et cetera. So from time to time, selling deer, venison, creating a market does come up. But there is a lot of opposition to that in the public, especially. That subject has been broached in different states. And again, it really goes against the fundamental principle that wildlife belong to all of the people. So when you put a monetary value on it, people quickly tend to be opposed to that.
Interesting.
And the other thing that goes along with that, and we've never done any formal modeling or investigation, but talking to a lot of my counterparts and all, I question whether you could create a sustainable market for venison. I just don't know that there would be enough demand out there to eat deer meat, to buy deer meat from enough people to make a difference from a management perspective. So, but we may see, like I said, this comes up from time to time. So, we may see a shift in this course down the road. I hope not. But as of right now, that's why we don't allow buying and selling most wildlife, including deer.
Right. Somebody wrote a comment here about how they were working in a approximately 570-acre fenced area, and they were doing contraceptive in collaboration with another private organization. And then that the collaborator withdrew and the fence population became uncontrolled. And I wonder if I'm reading this correctly, if that was due to some insistence from the MDE, Zona test D. What is that?
Zonistat D is the latest drug.
Mm-hmm. And MDE was insisting not using that being injected, just in case maybe a deer might escape and be eaten, maybe.
Yeah, I think there might be some confusion on on agencies involved, but
Okay.
yeah, that's there is concern in the state about Zonistat D entering the food chain for sure. So based on labeling requirements.
Another question, is there anything we can do to manage or reduce the deer population in suburban neighborhoods? We have many deer population groups. Would you ever consider driving deer from suburban to larger open areas?
So yeah, so the driving deer part just it wouldn't work. It's just that's not feasible at a scale where it would work. And then again, you're just moving the deer problem somewhere else. We really struggle with the urban community deer management, and we'll keep working at that. But again, it's a challenge for sure. And there's hunting going on in a lot of areas where we never thought hunting would go on before, and based on housing density, et cetera. But we still have to fall back on until we get other technologies that are effective. We still fall back on trying to incorporate hunting, whether it's archery hunting or whatever is compatible, as a way to try to reduce deer numbers. Trying to drive deer, that's not feasible. They would just come back for one, and you'd probably have a lot of extraneous mortality, et cetera. So that just wouldn't be a feasible answer.
You mentioned early on that they're the biggest natural predator to deers are humans. Somebody was questioning here, what if we introduced more natural predators in higher density areas?
So we get that question from time to time, like bringing mountain lions in or bringing wolves in, and they're just not compatible with human densities in the east. We traditionally had mountain lions in the east, but with the human densities, they're just not compatible. And again, they may be effective at maintaining deer populations or reducing deer populations, but it would never be compatible with the human population. So just not feasible.
Okay, so somebody's questioning here, a complimentary question. How much of a positive impact is the native coyote population on culling deer populations?
So there's some areas in the country where coyotes are thought to be effective at influencing deer populations, but just looking at the data we have here in Maryland, I don't think they're really having a significant impact on deer populations. Again, we have very productive deer, very productive habitat. Coyotes will make use of that fawn resource early on, but they're rarely taking adult deer. And of course, deer are synchronous breeders, so they're saturating the landscape with fawns in late May, early June. There's only so many that coyotes can consume, or bears, et cetera. So the data we have, looking at recruitment rates and those kind of data, doesn't really stand out that coyotes would be having much of an impact on our deer populations at this time.
Okay. Somebody's looking for some more advice here. So the DNR did a forest assessment in the 3 reservoirs, Baltimore County and Carroll County. They determined that 80% of their reservoir watersheds were not regenerating due to deer and invasive vines and such. What are they doing now, or should they be doing? What advice would you give for wanting to regenerate those areas?
Well, they have active archery programs in those reservoir properties. So if, you know, it may be a need to expand hunting on those areas if it's feasible. That's, probably going to be the first recommendation, would be to expand, hunting in some form or fashion, whether it's to not just be archery, but maybe some of the other weapon types. I would have to talk to them, and get the specifics, to be
Okay.
honest with you, and come up with a plan.
Great. So they can definitely reach out to you. That's great.
Yes.
So this is an interesting one, but I want to I also want to make a comment after we answer this because I think well, maybe I'll talk about it now. There's that new hunters program, at least on the shore here in Maryland, where a new hunter can partner up with somebody from the DNR, for example, that's going through Blackwater.
Yep. Yeah. The
Yeah,
mentored hunt program.
thank you. Yeah. And do you know where people can find out about that?
Uh, Definitely online. I don't have the actual web address handy, but if you search online, you will find Mentored Hunt Program. If you Google or search our webpage, I'm sure you'll get a hit for that. No
Yeah.
doubt. And that is a great program. That goes back to our outreach. It's a shout out to our outreach staff that are coming up with these kinds of programs to try to help with these declining license sales. And that is a really great program. It's more than just DNR. There's some of the private organizations are involved as well, federal organizations. And there's been a lot of effort put forth in that. But if they just search the website, they should be able to find some information.
I've heard positive things about that program. They have it for turkey and for deer. So
Yes,
this
both.
is segueing into the next question. Somebody said, "Hey, if you're doing outreach efforts, what about reaching out to the video gamers? They have practice with guns in quotation."
There you go. I'll make note of that.
Okay, so somebody was raising a concern here. So we've had uncontrolled deer hunting, fire shots at each other, drinking, very, very unsafe. So we stopped it. So it must be on their land. I don't know. Maybe this person was typing something that was continued from a previous message.
Okay.
So they stopped that hunting and had to deal with the hate from that. So they're gradually adding hunters back, ones they can trust. But there's been some bad actors out there. Often have deer taken out of season, even left in the woods with the bullet. So, can you give some advice on somebody that wants to open up their land to somebody on how to kind of vet that process? Like, what questions can they ask? How can they get responsible people on their property that are going to do good by the land and respectful of the owner of the property?
Right. So you definitely should be able to find those folks because they are the majority. There's always bad apples, and unfortunately, they give everybody a bad name. But there are all kinds of quality hunters out there looking for places to hunt, and word of mouth is probably going to be your best bet.
Okay.
Either a family member or a friend that knows somebody looking for a place to hunt. You shouldn't have to put up with bad apples. That's for sure. And like I said, there are a lot of hunters out there that are responsible, ethical, and I generally just recommend going word of mouth. Is your best bet. Somebody will know somebody looking for a place to hunt for sure. So no doubt.
Okay. Great, good. So there's some more conversation in the chat about, introducing species like wolves, the mountain lion, and I think you kind of addressed that idea of reintroducing natural predators.
Yeah, just not compatible with the East Coast landscape, particularly Maryland. Yeah.
Okay, so there's somebody put some information on there about the chronic wasting disease and a little link there for frequently asked questions from the USGS.
Great, thank you.
Yes. So if you want to find out more about that, there's the link for that. Is chronic wasting disease a threat to other animals, domestic or wild?
So CWD has not been shown to be a threat to other animals, but there are prion diseases that other animals do get. But no, just like it hasn't been shown to be a threat to humans, it hasn't been shown to be a threat to other domestic or wild animals. Can't say never, but to date, there hasn't been any evidence of that.
Right now, Fido is okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
So we're getting a lot of thank yous and appreciation for the great information that you're giving us, and that it's a topic that a lot of people care about. And then this is a question that popped in my head too. I'm glad somebody asked it. Can we trap deer? Where can we, so there's a two-part question. Can we trap deer? And where can we get a deer butchered?
Yeah, so you can't trap deer. No, you cannot trap deer. It's not a fur bearer, or not a species that has a trapping season. So trapping would not be permitted. But there are, there's butchers around in every county. Some also do domestics, so maybe you're, a local domestic butcher, that also does deer during deer season. But then a lot of them are just individual, backyard type operations that do great work. If you look in so there's a Maryland Guide to Hunting and Trapping that comes with your hunting license, and that's online. There's a list of butchers actually in that hunting guide. And they're actually the butchers we cooperate with for some of our data collection, and also, so it's not a all-inclusive list. There's a lot of other ones out there as well. But to get started, if you look in the Maryland Guide to Hunting and Trapping, there is a list of butchers by county, to give you an idea. But there's quite a few of them around for sure.
So we just got a few more. So I'm going to take it to 1:30, just so we're not holding our guest speaker up. He's got some deer to chase or something, but we got a few more questions here. Is that okay, Brian?
Yep, sure.
So if somebody sees a deer that may be exhibiting symptoms, or they've bagged a deer that has chronic wasting disease, should it be reported? If
Yeah.
so, and are they only counting? Oh, okay. So this person's asking, are they only counting carcasses, or can you report
So yeah, we appreciate, any report we get of sick or unusual acting deer. 9 times out of 10, it's not CWD or chronic wasting disease. There's a lot of other ailments that deer have or get that mimic CWD. But yeah, we cooperate with the Maryland Department of Agriculture Health Lab. So when we get suspicious deer like that, we generally take it to them, and they will do some tests for us to try to figure out what the problem was. But yeah, if they see a deer that's acting, wasted or wasting away or emaciated, they definitely could contact us, and we would try to come, depending on the circumstance, we'd probably try to get it for testing. Yes.
Great. And you're easily Googleable to find the phone number or the email address that you gave us a couple times already.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yep.
So I have one of these deer. I have to spot one of these deer sometime in the field behind my house here, a piebald deer. So the question here is, does a piebald deer tell you anything about interesting about the genetic expression? So I know my questions are, does that mean there's some inbreeding happening, or is this just
well, it's a recessive gene that causes piebaldness, and a lot of times they definitely are more common in high density deer populations. So it can be an indicator that you have a lot of deer, not necessarily all the time, but it can be an indicator of high deer densities for sure. But it's not really, I wouldn't say inbreeding necessarily.
Okay. I was told here that there's a follow-up survey. So that link to the follow-up survey for this webinar will be coming up, will be sent out to participants. So when exploring my neighborhood conservation patch in suburban Bethesda, I came upon decomposing deer carcass. I saw vultures. Is there any benefits to reporting that to your organization? So if somebody sees a dead deer in a conservation area, should they call or contact your agency?
It wouldn't hurt. In most cases, we'll make note of it, and that will be as far as it goes. We're definitely interested if it's more than one deer that you see. So like maybe multiple deer died for some reason. But oftentimes it could just be a car strike, or something along those lines. But yeah, and we may say so if you call or report it. But yeah, we like to monitor that. So I'm not telling everybody out there to call for every dead deer you see, but if you have a suspicious one, feel free to notify us, and at the very least we'll make note of it in case somebody else sees other ones. So,
Okay.
yeah.
That's good. So somebody says, let's say a wooded suburban community focuses on reducing deer populations. How would that help? Wouldn't deer just move from one surrounding county to the other?
So deer do exhibit site fidelity. So if you go in and you lower the density in a wooded community, that density will remain for a period of time. But hunting definitely isn't a one and done. You can't just go and do it once and think you fixed the deer population for the next decade. It takes an ongoing effort. But you definitely, if you would go in a year and reduce the deer density down, you definitely would see the benefits of that for a number of years thereafter. But again, you can't just approach it as one and done. And that's kind of evident in that if you look across Maryland's landscape where we have hunting, we have much lower deer densities than refuge areas where we don't have hunting. So that kind of supports that, that you have to keep doing it, but you definitely can have an impact in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm. We're getting compliments, and somebody mentioned about the audio cutting in and out. We apologize for any, technical difficulties on that and hearing stuff.
Sorry. Hopefully it wasn't too bad.
Somebody brought up the point, how we talked about, can we market deer meat? Somebody said, hey, well, they're selling buffalo meat raised like cattle. Any thoughts?
So there is a little bit of a difference there in that those buffalo are domesticated. And so you do actually have that with deer as well. Deer farming, there are domesticated whitetails, and all other species as well, where they do sell the meat. So we're kind of comparing apples and oranges. What we were talking about earlier was a free-ranging wild deer being harvested in one way or another and selling that meat. That's different than selling meat from a domesticated animal, even if it originally was a wild animal and now domesticated. So that's the difference between the nuance between those two discussions. Right. And you can actually buy deer meat in Maryland, but it has to be pre-packaged from captive deer that originated out of Maryland. So you can actually go to some restaurants or some stores in Maryland and buy deer meat, but again, it was domesticated in another state. So that does occur, but we were talking about free-ranging wild deer that belong to everybody. Basically, that's the difference. So
I'm glad you pointed those two differences out. So we're not going to be marketing any wild, free-range, hunter caught deer, but if it was under a controlled setting and kind of farmed, I put brackets in farmed deer, that there could be a market
that happens. That's not that probably won't happen in Maryland because there's a lot of disease risks with captive deer. They live under high density. And they move them around. So I don't think Maryland will ever allow captive deer farming, but that does exist in other states. So you can definitely buy and sell venison from other states for sure. So like I said, the selling of wild deer does come up from time to time, and it's even been in our legislature from time to time. So you can't ever never say never. I hope it doesn't go there, but we may end up, you may see a point down the road where you can buy and sell wild venison. So we'll see.
We got a lot more comments. I see that it's 1:30. How about we go another 5 more minutes? I'm enjoying myself. So, one last, the hunter monitoring program is on the links to that are in the chat box.
Yep. See that.
People are wondering, okay, you're looking at the chat box too.
Yeah, so go up two from that. Somebody said hire hunters to go out periodically to control deer. Any thoughts? And that just simply is economics, where identifying a money source to do that, because it would be pretty expensive, and frankly, there's a whole hunting population out there that will do it for free if they can just get access. So try, when you start talking about spending money on deer management, it quickly gets, it's hard to identify those money sources. We can't, going back to our Pittman Robertson dollars, our federal aid dollars that we get as hunting license sales money, there's very tight sideboards on what we can use that money for. And just as an example, and to try to hire people to go out and control deer, we would not be able to use that pool of money to do that. So, and it's for that reason, it's to protect hunt, it's to encourage hunting and making use of that resource that we already have to do the job. So.
Okay, so I'm just it looks like we have some great links. Thank you, Carl D, for putting in those links. There's links to frequently asked questions about deer management from Washington Grove, Maryland. And the one last question, somebody wanted to elaborate a little bit more about the trapping, no trapping permits. And we got a lot of compliments, Brian, about how great and informative this has been. So I appreciate
Thank you all.
Time with us today.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate more on the no trapping permitted?
It's just, it's not defined as hunting. So, we obviously have trapping of fur bearers in Maryland, but laws prevent the trapping of deer. And I think if you proposed allowing trapping of deer and then euthanizing deer, that has been done in other states, in high density areas, and there is a lot of pushback to that. When you talk about the general public, they do not like the idea of trapping a deer, restricting it, and then euthanizing it. It gets a lot of bad publicity. And again, it's not an approved method for taking deer in Maryland or just about any other state. I think most states have a law against that. So that's like I said, it's just, there'd be a lot of public blowback to proposing something like that to be allowed. So.
Okay.
Can I just put a plug in? So if you go up for your comments, Ryan Butler,
Okay.
Ryan said, if helpful, we are always happy to discuss managed hunting and screening hunters, parksdeermanagement.org. So Ryan, hopefully he doesn't mind me saying this, but he's with Montgomery County. So he's right there involved with their managed hunt program. They have a great program. And so if there's anybody out there that is interested in helping out, go to parksdeermanagement.org. So.
Yeah, you can plug whatever you want there.
He might not like it, but
good point.
Sorry, Ryan.
Well, great, Brian. This has been great. We hope that you can join us again for another talk at some point.
Sure.
We appreciate everybody from New York to Pennsylvania to Maine to Maryland that came and joined us today. So we really do appreciate that. If you want to find out more, please continue to look for that Branching Out newsletter that they will have the updates on that. You can also follow Woodland Stewardship Education Program on Facebook. Google them and find them there. And any other questions about the programming through Woodland Stewards, Andrew Kling, he is helping us out today. And there's his email on the screen there and his telephone number if you have any other questions about the program. And again, I said our next one is going to be September 30th with Bob Long, and he's going to talk about quail. I'm really interested about this bobwhite quail and how populations are different throughout the state of Maryland and where the populations are greater and what quail are greater in which parts. So I'm really curious about that and what habitat they require and what that looks like on the landscape. So Any last thoughts or anything else anybody wants to say before we take off here?
Thank you all. And like I said, feel free to, if you have further questions or if we didn't address your question, I'll be happy to try to answer it in an email or a phone call. So
Great. Great. Thanks again, Brian. I really
Yep.
appreciate it.
Sure thing. Take care, everybody. Stay
Take
safe.
care.